All right, welcome back, Anthropology of Religion, Magic, and Witchcraft students. Today we are going to go over our lecture on rituals. So the chapter that you should read from your beliefs textbook is chapter 6 on rituals. We will also, in addition to the reading and the recorded PowerPoint, we will have several video examples, short video examples that will show you various ritual rites of passage from various cultures as we learn about these various transitions. Oh, sorry, let me get to the right spot. All right, so let's begin by discussing essentially what is the function, what is the purpose, what is the reason that human beings go through ritual, and why is ritual so important to us? Um, even though it's obviously not the same rituals that were practiced cross-culturally and worldwide, all cultures do tend to have various ritual rites of passage, and they have ways that mark the transition from one stage in life to another. Ritual itself is defined as regularly repeated acts that embody and reinforce a group's beliefs, norms, and values. They oftentimes function to create cultural continuity and belonging. They will reinforce cultural norms. They will mark transitions and celebrate reincorporation with elevated status. They help us cope with tragedy, etc. So it is also defined as a sequence of events involving gestures, words, and objects. So symbols are oftentimes a big part, an integral part of ritual rites of passage and ritual in general. Rituals are performed in a specific place and time and according to a predetermined order. And of course, like I mentioned, they will create and build cultural continuity, reinforce norms and values, and reject those behaviors that are not considered normal behavior within society. So we will look at rituals that are both secular and religious. So secular just simply means does not involve religious beliefs or belief in the supernatural. Religious rituals involve the supernatural, and they can include the transitional coming of age rituals. They can involve what we call protection rituals. We'll look at some examples of those. And also what we call rites of intensification. We will also look at some of those in this module as well. So many of the rituals that we practice here in the Western world are what we call secular or not involving a belief in religion or the supernatural. So some good examples might be the Pledge of Allegiance, a graduation ceremony, many of the ceremonies that go along with our holidays like 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day, etc. And then oftentimes some events can be a little bit of both. Weddings and funerals oftentimes fit into that category, that a wedding or a funeral can be sometimes some religious elements and also some elements that are more secular and just traditional based upon what's popular in Western culture at that point in time. Or if we're looking at another culture, what's the trend in that culture at that point in time. So weddings and funerals may be a little bit of both. So much like many of the things we're learning about, it's not always one or the other. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. All right, so essentially, what's the function? Why do we as humans, why do we value ritual? Why is it adaptive? Why does it help us transition from one phase to another in our lives? So oftentimes rituals function to embody worldviews and cultural beliefs. So some examples here in the Western world, just to make it something that we can relate to. So we look at some of the rituals that go along with 4th of July, or with Memorial Day or 9/11 Remembrance Day, things like that. So a lot of times these rituals serve the function of reinforcing patriotism, this idea of self-sacrifice for our country, and also self-reliance. So oftentimes rituals will also achieve cultural outcomes. They draw attention or highlight certain aspects of a culture. And they also sometimes demonstrate social structure and order. So they do things like reinforce gender roles and reinforce societal hierarchies. So, for example, if you look at the ritual of the American wedding, for example, so the American wedding is very gendered. So even think about what the events that lead up to a wedding. So you know, the bachelor and bachelorette parties that are very gendered, those are separated oftentimes. Oftentimes, the bride will have a bridal shower where only the female attendees and female part of the bridal party is invited. Oftentimes, there's parties and ceremonies related to the bride and groom's selecting and then celebrating their bridal parties, the bridesmaids and the bridesmen and the groomsmen. So even just the tradition of having separate bridesmen and groomsmen is also a gendered aspect of the white wedding ceremony. So then during the ceremony, the bride and the groom wear very different attire. The bride is traditionally in all white, whereas the groom is traditionally in all black, or at least in darker colors. The ceremony of the father of the bride giving away the bride is also kind of reinforcing these, gender stereotypes, and also this idea of the man owning the woman as property and then passing it along to another man is kind of reinforced by this custom of the father giving away the bride. And then, some of the customs, such as the ring ceremonies, also the ceremonies of the tossing of the bouquet. Those also kind of reinforce this idea that all women want to get married and all men put it off as long as they can. Think about some of the past weddings you've gone to and the ceremony where the bride tosses the bouquet behind her. And then all of the single women at the ceremony are there, you know, supposedly hoping very much to catch that bouquet. But then when it comes to the groom tossing the garter belt to the single men at the ceremony, oftentimes you will see that the groomsmen are giving this demonstration of avoiding that catching that garter belt, because there's this idea in Western society that all women want to get married and all men avoid it as long as possible, which, may be somewhat grounded in reality and maybe just something that's been reinforced through this ritual. So it's just the purpose of that example was to give you an idea of how ritual can reinforce societal values, reinforce gender roles, and also reinforce societal hierarchies that look at women being passed down as property. Rituals also sometimes serve a political and economic role and function. So those that are engaging in the ritual, those novices that are transitioning from one phase in their life to another, are oftentimes signaling their own status as they're making this transition. They're enhancing their social status and or their wealth. They're creating or altering relationships with others as they go from unmarried to married, or non-parent to parent, or no college degree to college degree, et cetera, et cetera. So, we sometimes see that these rituals function to signal these transitions. The next one we're going to look at is Richard Soccies. Richard Soccies is was a behavioral ecologist, and he wanted to understand, essentially, is there a biological purpose to this need and this tendency to humans relying upon ritual? Because it is something, even though, like I mentioned, ritual will vary from cross-culturally. However, we do see that most cultures do engage in this to some degree. Some religious rituals require the novices or the practitioners to engage in extremely dangerous, possibly even deadly behavior to successfully finish the ritual and or show their devotion to that particular subgroup or subculture. So Richard Soccies looked at the springbok as a potential analogy within the natural world. So the springbok is this kind of antelope-like creature that we see here in the image. And the springbok when the springbok knows that there's a predator nearby, he will leap extremely high into the air. He or she will leap extremely high into the air. And the purpose for this, even though on the surface level it seems like, well, that must be so maladaptive. Why would that springbok want to waste all those calories and all that energy on this ritual instead of just running from the predator? But essentially, the function that it serves is that it basically shows that predator that there's no purpose in trying to attack that prey. Try to saying like, hey, there's no reason in trying to get me. I'm way too spry and have full of energy. You shouldn't even bother trying to chase me. I'll be much faster than you. So it's kind of like a display, a signal of how successful that prey would be at getting away from the predator. So it's what we call, or what he called, a costly signal. But it's so costly that you can't really fake it. Um, you have to be able to show that devotion to that particular purpose, whether it's avoiding a predator or whether it's showing your devotion to a particular belief system or religion. The greater the cost of the ritual, the greater the devotion of the practitioner, is basically what that signal is displaying. that, if that practitioner is willing to engage in that costly signal and that costly ritual, then they're investing so much energy and so much time, so much devotion, possibly risking their lives to engage in this ritual, that they must really be devoted. They must really care about being a part of this community. So the function, at least according to Richard Sosa's, his hypothesis is that the function of the costly ritual or the costly signal is to prevent free riders in religious communities. That there's no way that these practitioners would engage in this ritual if they didn't have true devotion to it, is basically how the hypothesis goes. All right, so we will look at some various ritual rites of passage. So Van Gemp identified 3 stages in a ritual rite of passage, and then Victor Turner later kind of re-exemplified and re-examined, especially the liminal phase. Turner really focused in on this liminal transitional phase where the novices will get this feeling or this sense of community or communitas. So the 3 stages that a novice will go through, the first stage is the separation phase, where the novices, the adolescents in these 2 cases are going to be separated from the rest of the community. And as they are separated, they're going to go through this transitional or liminal phase. And during this transitional phase, the novices will typically bond with one another. They go through this feeling of transition together, which in itself bonds them and solidifies their community. So oftentimes those going through a liminal or a transitional phase may have feelings of betwixt and between identities, a feeling of neither here nor there, a feeling of no status, a feeling of seeming to possess nothing, and also may experience that they're being homogenized or being bonded with those around them, those novices that are also going through these same feelings, which many of you may have experienced in something as simple as going through a job training or going through an initiation for a club or a sorority or a fraternity, or what you might experience when you join a new sports team. Many of you may have experienced some of these liminal or transitional feelings when going through day-to-day, or at least somewhat day-to-day type activities. So there's 2 examples I'm going to have you look at for your discussion this week. For discussion 3 on ritual rites of passage. I'm not going to play it during this recording. I'm just going to show you where it's located. That way, it'll be easier for you to identify. But the 2 examples I'm going to have you look at is the Xhosa. They're going to go through a circumcision ritual in South Africa. So I want you to look at those 3 phases, the separation, the liminal, and the reincorporation. Try to identify those 3 phases and also the purpose of those 3 phases. So think about, is there a cultural purpose? Is there a biological purpose? Does it reinforce worldview? Does it reinforce cultural values and norms? And then also look for symbols as well. So look for, is there, certain colors that are being used, or certain, is there any dance or song being used? Are there any symbols within these ritual rites of passage that further exemplify the purpose of the ritual? And then you'll look at the Apache coming of age, the Mescalero ceremony, and same thing. Look for the 3 phases. What is the purpose of the 3 phases? Are there any symbols involved? Are there any colors? Are there any dances? Is there song? What is the purpose? What is the culture? And what is the biological purpose? So I'll just show you real quick where it's located. And then you can actually, what I recommend is pause this video right here, pause this lecture video, and go ahead and watch these 2 ritual rites of passage right now. So the first one you're going to watch, well, it doesn't matter what order. So we're within 3.25, discussion post number 3, ritual rite of passage analysis. So the first one is going to be Inside an Apache Rite of Passage into Womanhood. This one's about 11 minutes. And then the second one is the male circumcision ritual of the Xhosa of South Africa. So this one is about 5 minutes. So once you hit play, the closed captions are actually burned into the lecture video.
Africa is home to the Xhosa people.
So you hear real quick.
Largest tribes.
So yeah, you actually won't have to click anything to get the closed captions to play for you or to be automatically embedded. They're automatically embedded there for you. All right, so go ahead and pause the lecture video and watch those 2 videos and then come back here. All right. So now let's go ahead and go on with looking at some personal lives in our, some personal examples in our own lives. So, like I mentioned, as you watch those two ceremonies, it's very possible that you found some similarities with rituals or even things you didn't necessarily realize are rituals within your own lives. So things like a training process for a new job, especially if it was a training process where you were going through it with other novices, other brand new employees that are going through the training process together. If you were in a training class, you may have gone through some of these, you may have felt some of these ways. Fraternities and sororities, the wedding process, even times makes you feel like you're very betwixt and between and neither here nor there as you're going through this ritual rite of passage. So as you engage in discussion this week, and there are other examples, I highlighted those two because I wanted to give you both a female and a male ritual rite of passage example. But there will be many other examples within Module 3 if there's others you'd like to focus on. All right, so the two main types of rituals are ritual rites of passage, which we just talked about. So these mark a transition in one's life. So some examples: a graduation ceremony, quinceañeras, weddings, baby showers, circumcision rituals, Apache coming of age or mescalero ceremony. Those are all considered ritual rites of passage. A rite of intensification would be a ritual that functions to maintain group equilibrium and solidarity. So a ritual that is collective, meaning that all members of the community are involved. And this can sometimes happen after a chaotic or stressful event, such as a natural disaster, before an important harvest, etc. So I would also consider things like the 4th of July or 9/11 remembrance rituals. Those are probably considered, those, in my opinion, would be considered rites of intensification within the United States, within the Western world. Technological rituals in your fourth discussion, your discussion for next week, we will look at some technological rituals. So these technological rituals are an attempt to control nature in some way. So they may involve rites of intensification around food and drink. They oftentimes will increase the likelihood of a successful hunt. So we talked a little bit about Malinowski and his studies of the Trobriand Islanders. So when they are hunting, when they go deep sea fishing, they oftentimes engage in ritual right before the hunt to ensure a successful hunt and to essentially to make it more likely that they will not be injured, because when they're hunting more in the shallow regions, it's pretty unlikely that they're going to be severely injured through the hunting process. But when they go out in these small boats and go deep sea fishing, the chance of injury and even death is far more likely. So they oftentimes engage in rituals that will ensure and secure a safe and successful hunt. We will also look at, in our discussion for next week, we'll look at the hallucinogen honey hunter ritual, and it will be considered, you could consider it a technological ritual, but also a rite of intensification around food or drink, because there's a very specific sequence of events they follow as they're hunting for honey. And, this honey also, the religious specialists that are going through this ritual will sometimes experience a little bit of altered state of consciousness as they consume this honey. So the examples that we're going to look at, the hallucinogen honey hunters, Roy Rappaport is an anthropologist that also, he studied the Tesambaga, and he looked at the ritual of the ritual slaughter of pigs as pigs became too all-encompassing and became too, their impact on the gardens, the horticulture was too intense. So the Tisambaga were engaging in both horticulture or very basic plant cultivation, and then also they were using pigs to support their subsistence as well. But they had this very delicate symbiotic relationship. When the pig population became too large, they would trample and overwhelm the plant population, the plants that the Tesambaga were also relying upon for their subsistence. So when this, when this balance, when the symbiotic relationship got thrown off balance, when the pig population was too high, they would go through this ritual slaughter of the pigs, and they would eat all the pigs. They wouldn't let anything go to waste. But it was considered kind of an offering to the ancestors. The ethnography that Roy Rappaport, sorry, that's a tongue twister. Roy Rappaport wrote was called Pigs for the Ancestors, because through this ritual, as they were sacrificing the pigs, it was believed by the Tesambaga that these were sacrifices for the ancestors. So there was essentially a supernatural and a cultural purpose along with a biological one, because they essentially, they knew that they wouldn't be able to continue to let this pig population grow exponentially without it completely overwhelming and depleting the horticulture aspect of their subsistence. So it's in my mind, one of those cultural behaviors, cultural rituals that serves both a cultural and a biological purpose, a supernatural and a biological purpose here in this example. All right, so protective rites. So these are preventing the harms that the forces of nature might cause. So natural disasters, diseases, etc. So also the Trobriand islanders that engaged in ritual, and had lots of symbolic trade of various items before they would engage upon these dangerous deep sea fishing voyages. So the Trobriand Islanders of New Guinea perform protective rituals to ensure safe travel in canoes, traveling dangerous trade routes and fishing routes. Even here in the Western world, the tradition of breaking a champagne bottle over the keel of a new ship is a sort of christening or baptism of the ship, but even that is kind of a ritual that is intended or believed to ensure the safe passageway of those that are traveling on that ship. Ideological rituals, so rites of intensification, like in the 4th of July or the 9/11 memorial ceremonies or Memorial Day. Those will function to ensure adherence to norms and customs and also kind of highlight and reinforce those cultural values. Taboos or ritual avoidance. So those will regulate human behavior and ensure norms are followed. So some taboo behaviors such as food taboos, um, courtesies, and encouraging desired behaviors. So for example, an example that we've all probably experienced is the tradition of not eating when you're out to eat with a group of people, whether it's family or friends, and sometimes your food comes out, at a slightly different time. There is that tradition that you don't start eating your food until everybody at the table has their plate. So that kind of just reinforces some of our cultural norms and values. Oftentimes, there's even some rituals that encourage the individual or the practitioner to engage in taboo behavior, but only for a restricted period of time. So, things like Halloween even could be considered a little bit of this, because for a short period of time, images of death, images of things that are spooky are considered more of the norm, whereas this is not encouraged in day-to-day interactions. Also rituals of um like, say for example, the ritual of Mardi Gras on in New Orleans. So for a short period of time, practitioners are encouraged to behave in a way that wouldn't be acceptable in day-to-day lives, such as drinking lots of alcohol and possibly exposing, regions of the body that wouldn't be exposed otherwise. So these, you're encouraged to engage in this ritual for short periods of time. But when you think about it, that actually reinforces the norms and values of the society, even more so, because it's kind of reminding you that this is only acceptable for this very short, very limited period of time, and also in this very limited location. So, if anything, this rite of rebellion or rite of reversal is pretty much just continuing to reinforce the norms and values of that culture or society. And there's also the Amish tradition of, even though they don't engage in drinking alcohol or any mind altering substances and they don't use electricity, there is a tradition of the adolescents going out and doing this for a restricted or short period of time. All right, revitalization rituals. So, this is a religious movement or ritual that strives to create a better culture, usually with the help of a perceived prophet. This is oftentimes a response to social disruptions. In history, it's usually been in response to colonialism. So it tends to focus on the return to a natural or native way of life. A great example of a revitalization ritual would be the cargo cults that we observed in Polynesian culture. So after the World Wars, the Polynesians, or during the World Wars, the Polynesians observed lots of what they called cargo. So lots of planes that were bringing in large amounts of cargo, food, supplies, etc. And during this time, they looked at these planes more as birds that were bringing in this cargo. And they looked at this cargo and these resources as offerings from their ancestors. And they didn't quite understand why these European white colonialists were getting access or gaining access to this cargo. So the Polynesians began to go through this ritualized behavior where they acted like the colonialists. They dressed up like them, engaged in the same behavior that they did, in this ritualized mechanism to hopefully acquire the cargo that was being given or perceived to be being given to the Europeans. So we call these cargo cults. And it was believed by the Polynesians that these Europeans were receiving this cargo, these rewards from the ancestors because of ritual. So they attempted to engage in the same rituals of the colonialists. All right, so that is the end of our lecture on ritual rites of passage. We will have our next lecture on symbols. So I will see you all then.